So this is what we're going to be doing today. We're just really sort of handing over to Wendy in just a second. But then we will be having an opportunity for questions and discussions later on, and Tony Watts will be chairing that. And so I thought I would just start by just introducing Wendy. This is what she told us about herself, that she was very 30, very short to
Statesman.
That was it.
It's like top.
We like 30 because it had us slightly.
Slightly unlucky ring.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been aware of Wendy's work for quite a long while. I think when you start to, as I come from sort of being involved in delivery career development programs and starting to get more interested in more what's the theory and research and so on behind it, you start to look around and you look at who's been writing, and you find a number of people, number of who are in the room today. But Wendy is certainly one of them. And one of the things that I'd been interested in, my sort of background, was working with research in universities and looking at how do you support people who are on a career path. So not people who are students, the people who are on a career path and perhaps are working through university. And a lot of what's written about careers still comes from very much a school perspective, or it comes from a kind of unemployed worker perspective. And what I found when I first engaged with Wendy's work was it was really useful to have somebody who was thinking about how do you develop the careers of people who actually have quite a lot of skills, who actually have quite a lot to offer, who are established on a career path but may have to switch or may be looking for ways to progress. What kind of support can you put in place for them? And so that was kind of how I first came across your work, I think. And I've then, I've described how we've been traveling quite a lot. As I travel around the world, I often will bump into people whose focus is in career coaching or working into organizations. And I'll often say, oh, I've got a colleague at NICEC. I don't know whether you know her. And they'll always say, oh, yes, we've had Wendy at our conference. She talks an awful lot of sense, but she certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons and got people talking. She was very controversial. And so people know Wendy, I think, across the world, and they're very, I think it's quite interesting that they both think she's controversial, but also tend to agree with what she said. It's quite interesting to me. And I know we're going to have a brilliant annual lecture today, and so without really further ado, I will hand over to Wendy and let you start off with then she can
Chase me. Well, I'm hoping this is going to work. Be good to know who's in the room. So how many of you do career guidance? And all of those who don't, what do you do? Academics in the room? Yeah. Students in the room?
I thought that they were retired.
Oh yeah, the people who did.
Yes.
Guide. Yes, how many people who
Stopped doing.
I reckon when I retire is when I can really start dealing with stuff properly. Exactly. So, yes. So it's an honour and a great joy to be in Derby today. I must say it's a long way from home. I live right down in the deep south, and I'm always surprised how far the Midlands is. So it's really nice to got here and lovely to have such an exciting room for the people. I seem to be incapable of reading from the script. I only really did it once, and a close colleague said I sounded like the Queen on a very bad day. So I've never dared do it. This is like careers advice. If someone says something to you once, so I've got some notes and I've got some slides, and I hope we'll make do. I'm planning to go at a fair lick and then allow a really good depth of time at the end. But if I talk nonsense, which is not unlikely, do stop me if I'm rattling in, I'm not explaining. Do stop me. Every now and then I may ask you a question, and my questions are never rhetorical. I really want something to say to then, so you might do that. First problem, if you're left-handed, is getting the slide thing right. See if that works. Yes. These are some of the things we're going to talk about today. I gave myself a funny title, Career Support for Grown-Ups. One of the problems is we don't have anything we can call career. What is it? You can't talk to employers about career guidance. They think about marriage guidance. Counselling is a fun word in the UK. Coaching means different things to different people. Some people don't like the word career support. They make it sound like people means patching up. Actually, of all the tests I've tried, it's the one that more people seem to understand. So I'm not using it for any complicated reason, just because by career support, I really mean all the things we might do to help people with their career development. And in particular, when you're looking at adults, it really is very largely not about career choices and career decisions or career facts. It's also about acting upon those. And there are lots of people who don't worry so much about what they want to do, but the doing of it is very difficult when you're a grown-up. And so the reason I use the term career support is to cover not just supporting people in their career choices and decisions, but very much in developing their careers then, in taking action. Grown-ups is obviously a rather silly term. I do mean adults, but I also mean supposing we were to be more grown-up about this, what kinds of things would we do? If we recognise that adults want something adult, what would it look like? Career development is a sort of tiny profession. I shall play some game numbers a bit later, perhaps. Or is it everyone's business? The business of business, the business of everyone that works, probably the business of all grown-ups. You might have your own answer to that question. I wouldn't promise to come back to the question at the end, because I'm serious about whether it really is everyone's business. When I'm thinking about grown-ups today, I'm definitely, as Tristram hinted, in a way the people I have in my mind, the ordinary working adults. It's not particularly high skill, not particularly low skill, a vast range of kinds of jobs. They may be working part-time, they may be working full-time, they may be working for themselves. But I'm not on the whole thinking today about people with extreme difficulties in employment, because I have much less experience of working in that world. Although I will touch on a study of prisoners who turned out to be remarkably interesting in terms of their career choices. So it's a bit like the ordinary child gets forgotten at school, the ordinary adult sort of completely absently goes. It always seems to me. Where do my messages come from? As standing in a university, I'm always aware that my own evidence base is slightly ropey, really. I do research about half my time, and I advise employee organisations about half my time. And so my views tend to come from every now and then trying to do some fairly systematic work, but often from all the managers and employees I talk to, all the talkies, and the people in HR who are often my clients. Who are of all, a wide scatter of people in the workplace, union representatives too, of course. So I think this talk is really only a connected set of experiences and ideas. It's not a heavily academic input. I do want to talk about why career development is an issue for grown-ups, but also for employers, and maybe point to some really interesting shifts going on, I think, with employers. I'm really interested for your views, as well as mine, of what is it that individuals really want to talk about if they want to talk about career issues. Who do they talk to? Who could they talk to? I will give you some thoughts about the kinds of different models employers have used if they do want to set up some slightly more substantial career support, usually in the workplace or through them. And then we'll come back to that question, and is it a tiny profession or everyone's business or a bit of both? Does that sound okay? Anyone sleep here? This was my mother's acid test. She was a polytechnic lecturer. She never minded if they fell asleep, so residential social workers, she was thought by having a nap in her class was reasonable. Very humane woman, my other. I will just start with a bit of very recent research. This is a piece of work that the Institute for Employment Studies, an institute I've worked with and for a long time, has just done for BIS. BIS said a very interesting exam question. They didn't want anything evaluated, change in government. They just said, so how do grown-ups make decisions then about their careers? If we want to think about how adults approach career decision-making, what do they do? And this is one of a couple of models that came out of the research, really just designed to map, in a way, the kinds of stuff people think about when they're thinking about their working lives. Does it all look fairly familiar to you? Can you see it at the back? Or not too easily? Well, I suppose what struck me doing the work and putting this together, this is based on a study of very in-depth interviews, not with a huge sample, with 50 adults, some of whom were picked up through the career service, and as many who weren't, and included a batch of prisoners that my colleague Lee Henderson talked to, because the bit of government that's responsible for prisons was to talk to people as well. And I suppose what struck me is we all know about all that stuff, but when people think about careers and when people talk to them, I suspect there are bits of that map that I'm more aware of than other bits, and there may be bits I forget. One of the bits that came out really strongly in these long narrative interviews about decisions was the blue one in the top left-hand corner. Very closely related to some of Jim Sampson's work on psychological states. How am I feeling about myself generally in my life? And people in many different jobs with very differing skill levels and employment histories were so deeply coloured just by how they were at that time. Does that resonate? And we think about that for people in difficulty, that this wasn't necessarily to do with particular difficulty. How optimistic am I feeling, really? How up for stuff, generally? The stuff in the bottom left-hand corner was interesting in that when people were talking about how they saw their careers, it wasn't really about a career plan. It was sometimes about a career goal. But the term career identity came a lot closer. So do you know the work of Emina Ivara? Have you read that lovely book on career identity? If you haven't, I do recommend it. That thought about, well, who am I becoming in my working self, was much closer to how many of the people were thinking than this is my next step. And particularly so for the prisoners. What sort of person am I going to be when I get out of here? The other stuff perhaps was more expected. The yellow bits on that diagram aren't just there because yellow and blue is kind of different. The yellow bits are sort of the obscurities and constraints parts of people's pictures. And interesting stuff there, I think, particularly on the middle on the right, that really understanding the labour market loomed enormous for all the big makers study. And even people of very high levels of skill and with very, interesting careers still felt they needed to keep on top of what was happening, and that may be happening in their field or happening in a field they're thinking of being interested in that they don't know about. And I just wonder sometimes if the whole world of career guidance really acknowledges just how big that is. Do you think we mean and do? That gives me some understanding what's out there. She talked as much, if not more than that, than the stuff that's in here. So there's stuff out there, and stuff that's in here. The stuff out there is really hard for people. Really, really hard for people. But here are just a few. I don't know if they're easy to read. I'll read them for you because of the fact it might not be easy. But just to point out some of those features, really. This is an unemployed, not particularly well-qualified young person. I worked in 2 cafes. I was a care worker. I was working in a housing association. I worked in a pizza shop. They're not all the same jobs. It's just any job that comes up. I was just applying for any, just to get a job. And just really, it was for my mum to say, yes, I'm actually doing something with my life. That was not that uncommon a kind of person. The next one is someone being really quite strategic about their career, but not in an orthodox way. After 6 months of the news agency, I started doing cleaning jobs because I knew why I was doing it. I was supporting the music again. This is a budding rock star. Having to do stuff that you basically don't have to be educated for. I needed it at that time to be part-time.
I needed it to be a bit flexible, so I was fitting stuff around music, if you chose to be. So that sort of way that people are managing their working lives. The last person was a woman thinking of going back to work, who interestingly looked at what she could do with a PhD and then decided she didn't really want to do it. I do feel there was a bit in the middle of my career where I drifted a bit, do my PhD and things. It was nice. It was enjoyable at the time, but I wasn't thinking of any longer term. Now, in some ways, I want to be in something for the next 20 years, which I don't think I've ever done before. And what would I like to be in for 20 years? Helping people where I can with something that I know I can do and something I'll actually enjoy doing. And although obviously each story is unique to a person, that was such a recurring theme. That feeling, and it occurred at different life stages for different people, of wanting to do something for quite a while, but something you might actually really want to do. So all this stuff in women's magazines about portfolio workers, blah, 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 it's not necessarily that close to how people think about their lives. That makes sense to you? Familiar sorts of stories? Obviously, every person's different, but some of those themes came out very strongly, and that's where that model came from. And I suppose what one saw in a lot of those stories was a growing awareness of people's, in themselves, of their interests and their strengths, also of their own weaknesses and things they wanted to do something about, and a very strong interplay between their choices and what was going on in the rest of their lives. I'm not unsure about the prisoners' market, for them even more so, and particularly repairing the damage of their family relationships. I suppose what comes out of that study, when you start talking about, well, then who helps with that stuff, and is exactly the same as what I've seen when I've looked in the workplace of what it will say about careers, is people say they want someone to sit down and talk to. And it's very interesting that the word sit down, there's something about sitting, isn't there? And you feel that cup of tea is heavily in brackets. You know, if you do this in England, it is like sit down, brackets over a cup of tea, and properly talk to me. And I just think the way people say that is so interesting. And it's exactly the same as what people say at work. So really, what people want is some time. They want to take some time, and they sometimes feel that someone else giving them some time is really what career support is about. And that is a quote. We didn't have many people in our BIS study who had something productive from formal career guidance, but the blue words are from someone who had and was reflecting on it and said, I think it's a bit of time, actually. It's a bit of time with a few tools to try and motivate people. And they had a bit of time, but they'd also had a little interest inventory and some quite simple things. But it was the fact that that was in the context of someone actually taking the time for them to say out loud and work through some of what they wanted to. And in any workplace, you would find people saying the same thing. If you unpick it a bit more, there were a lot of people in that study, and again, I've seen exactly the same in the workplace, who are asking the labour market question, what's out there? But they nearly always add, for someone like me. Not just what's out there. So all these massive directories of jobs aren't really what people want. They want to know, for someone like me, this is a non-rhetorical question coming up, what does someone like me mean? When people say that, like me in terms of a whole range of these, in the age, class, yeah, educational table, yeah, stuff I've done before. It's a very complex context, isn't it? But they don't just want to know, well, you could become one of these, you know. If you were, they're always saying, if you were me, sometimes. If you were me, what sorts of things might you be thinking about? Some people really want to know what they're good at. And in particular, they want to know what they're good at relative to other people. We have ideas about what we're good at. But particularly when you're an adult, what matters is finding something you might be as good at as other people are, or even better than some other people, and then you're really onto a winner. Something I'd enjoy is performance very high. Some people just don't know where to start at all. My children can't be the only children who say, well, career services are very good if you know what you want to do. But if you don't have any idea what you want to do, that's really hard. And I think some people don't know where to start with the process. In the BIS study, there were a couple of more specific things. One was that some people wanted to get qualified and were very blocked through cost and time. Except, of course, the prisoners. So the top tip if you want to get free education, it's prison. I've also been working with the military this year, and the army is quite good too. So, you know, that's a new life strategy. Get yourself an apprentice and get your degree. Some people to move into a new area made them know what area they wanted to move into. There was one very interesting woman in the study who'd had a whole run of jobs in the sort of machinery leasing sector. And she was very bright. She got promoted wherever she went. And after about 10 years, she thought she'd like to do something different. And she realised she had no idea how any other sector worked. That was quite a small sector. Everybody knew everybody. She got headhunted. I don't think she'd ever had to apply for a job. Her dad got her first one. And after that, she was good. And so people said, well, I'm work for us. But you realise that people like that who on paper look very successful have understood exactly how one little area of our economy works. But she didn't know how to even start looking at what other parts of the economy she could work in. If you asked her about transferable skills, she could rattle that off. This isn't someone who doesn't understand what she can do. She just doesn't understand what jobs there are, how they're gobbed, you know, who you'd approach, the whole shooting match and her sort of career tactics. Does that sound familiar? So, second non-rhetorical question. Actually, I think I may have this. No. Yes. Does that look familiar to you? That sort of... that kind of... Are there really big things you see with adults that aren't anywhere on that? Not usual red box. Are some of the biggest to you too?
Can I just toss in a word?
Yes.
Getting into new area.
Yeah.
For me, that means reinventing oneself.
Yes.
And reinvention of oneself is something that maybe one needs to pick out. There's more. And because that's what one needs to do in relation to new aims, new contexts, these new areas you're talking about, they may not know much about. The reinvention of oneself is a constant, lifelong, but they're acquired.
Yes, and I think what most people don't know whether they really have to change, and whether it's just the way they're putting themselves across to others. So that woman I gave the example of, she's a very flexible person. She probably didn't need to reinvent herself. She needed to sort of shape a slightly different identity. But she represents, isn't it? It's closer to what she really needed to do. So I think just what these transitions are like for people is very interesting. The prisoners, many of them, had to completely reinvent themselves there because they're almost like starting again. Then a lot of tickling in between. But yes, that's sort about. People don't use the word transition in normal life. No, that is what they're talking about. Absolutely. Okay. And I just want to say something about employers. This may be less familiar to you. I realise it was like you coughing. Having asked you to cough when it's time for me to stop. Would you clap when it's like? Otherwise, every time you cough, I think, oh crikey, yeah. I just want to say something about what's going on with employers because it's really interesting. Do we have any employers in the room or people working larger? Where it's a shame because you've got Rolls-Royce up the road who do this stuff almost better than anyone, I often think. But there's a funny story in employers, particularly at the moment in larger employers, and it goes a bit like this. They don't really mind career stuff very much. So really for the last 20 years or so, they've been sort of sticking their fingers in their ears and looking the other way to a degree. They don't really think it's necessary, career stuff, quite a lot of the time. We had all that ridiculous stuff in the 1990s about people managing their own careers, or Bridges books, or what rubbish about, job shifts. We had Handy, because he had a portfolio and written himself, thought everyone else was going to have them. They're very nervous about expectations. Expectations is a really dirty word in the workplace, because if people expect more and we can't deliver it, then what happens? So if we help someone see that they could do more, but we can't offer them that opportunity, then that leaves us in a very uncomfortable place. Although we also then worry about retention. I'll come back to that again in a minute. But we're not sure if it's worse to talk to people about careers and they may get up themselves and leave, or is it worse that we don't talk to them about careers and they may leave anyway? And you'll have another look at that with some different data. They don't have anyone to do career support anyway. So what's the point in even thinking about it? They have hammered their own HR functions if they were ready for that. They do outplacement, and they've now really stopped doing outplacement because that's sort of a social necessity. But let's not confuse outplacement with career support. That's in very specific circumstances. It's also always seemed bizarre to me that we only get career support when we're being sacked. So that is really weird, isn't it? And in a way, they've said, well, we've got stuff online. So their intranets are cluttered with all sorts of stuff about jobs and procedures. And most of the stuff about jobs is stuff in the terms that HR people define jobs, which is long lists of skills and competencies and so on. They're job descriptions and skill descriptions, and they're quite useful when you're selecting somebody or training somebody. They don't tell you what you want to know if you're thinking, could I do that? Competencies are only some of the things you need to think about, and they're way too long and they're too fiddly. So you read 10 and you think, oh, heavy sake, this doesn't help me. And they're very hard to find anyway. So the whole business of saying, well, we can shove stuff up online hasn't really helped much. So we've been there for a long time. But there's some interesting things that have been happening recently. One of them is talent management. Do you know if that's talent management? This is the field I'm supposed to work in, but I haven't ever quite decided what it means. But loosely, after that long period of sort of forgetfulness, employers discovered there were all sorts of jobs they couldn't fill very well. The UK labour market is notoriously fickle. And so you want to appoint a senior person or a skilled person, and you find you haven't got any. And you find if you go to the market that you can get applicants, but they're not very good either. There's no guarantee you're going to get someone turn up that you want. And it's led employers for the last 10 to 15 years, really, on a massive crusade to think about, so how do we develop people better so that when we have a job that's tricky to fill, we've got someone fairly ready to fill it. This is succession planning. This is biblical age. This is most of what Shakespeare is about. But, we do get a new name and think it's new. They're getting very interested not just in managers, but in professionals, and also in things that they're often calling critical roles, which might not be senior or highly skilled jobs at all, but they're very essential to run a business. And as more sectors are regulated, you find that if you haven't got people that the regulator says you need, you can't do the work to shut it down. So there's been interesting stuff going on there. There have been things called talent reviews, where managers sit down, look at a lot of people and think, well, who have we got that we could put a bit of effort into and develop towards this kind of stuff? And before you know it, you're talking about potential. You're talking about what do people have the potential to do that they're not doing now? And potential, is it not about careers? Isn't it careers we end up with when we start down this route? I did some work with a lovely woman at European Parliament called Erica Landy, a linguist, but English is not her first language, so she uses English much better than any of us do. And we were supposed to be working on talent management in the European Parliament, which is an interesting experience. And she said, after we'd been working for a few weeks, I knocked at the door of talent management and found myself in the room of career development. And I thought, what an interesting woman she is. And she's quite right, that you start off saying, where's our next generation of wonderful linguists going to come from? And then you find yourself starting to think about, so if we had a young linguist then, what would we be doing with them? What would we be helping them to think about? What kinds of breadth of experience? That's careers. It's exactly careers. So talent has brought people back to careers, not necessarily for everyone, but for quite large slices of the workforce. Diversity remains a pressure on employers, and that's made them interested in the careers of different groups. Skills and deployment. I'm going to come to that last. Let's just go up to the top for a minute. Engagement. Who's come across engagement? Who read the McLeod review? Engagement. Engagement is to employers like what employability is to further education. You know, he's kind of the new and loudest kid on the block. Engagement is about how we make people at work want to do it. It's kind of motivation, really, with a new name. And I think what people have discovered, again, it wouldn't surprise you, is that if you look at the factors that make people say, I want to work here and I want to put a lot of effort into my work here, the kind of personal attention that people get if you talk to them about their careers is quite high on that list. So there's some very interesting connection between that sitting down and talking we talked about earlier, that kind of attention, and people wanting to really engage with their workplace. And I think that's about how personal the career stuff is. I don't know what you think that's about. I think it's about engaging with me as a person. And if you look at the kind of factors that people do stats on and correlate, one of the Gallup ones, which is widely used in a survey, is my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. That's not very sport. There's someone at work who encourages my development. In the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. This last year, I've had opportunities at work, to learn and grow. Now, there are only 12 statements that they correlate with engagement. I've just read you 4, and they're all, to my ears, fairly career-related. There are others that are not so career-related. So when you look at huge samples across industries of the kinds of questions that if you say yes correlates with your high engagement in what's happening at work, you get that sort of stuff. And this isn't just for the highly skilled in the senior, that's for everybody. That applies to the most junior shop floor member of staff in a shop and so on. Which bits haven't we talked about? This is perhaps the one that's come to my attention really recently, which is a reawakening of interest in how we then deploy people well across businesses. We have people with all sorts of different skills. Organizations are still under pressure of trying to do a lot with not as many people as they would like. And so particularly if they're investing to a reasonable degree in developing people, they do then want to make sure that those people find their way into jobs where those skills are well used. And I think if I think about the things I expect employers to be interested in over the next few years, skill deployment can be very high on my list. And one of the things they've found is that the open job market is very inefficient. So most employers advertise things they're interested in you doing, and it's up to you to apply. Even if you're inside the business, you still apply. That's a very inefficient way of finding people who can do the job well, partly because shy people don't apply, partly because the one best person is invariably on holiday during the 2-week period it's up on the notice board. The really good people don't spend their lives looking at the job board, so they miss it. These are electronic boards, obviously. They miss it anyway. So that is not a very efficient system. So employers are looking again. So if we knew our people better, would we be able to have a better conversation with them about, well, this job's coming up over here. Would you be interested in applying? You'll still probably compete for it, but but a much more and overt way. Oh, the slides are telling me to move on, so I will. All that leads you to career conversations, and it's funny how fashionable career conversations have suddenly become in the workplace. Everyone's talking about having better career conversations. Isn't that funny? I mean, spend 20 years trying not to use the career word. This is a study done by Jonathan Winter and Charles Jackson, Career Innovation, that looked at, this is 700 people in big organizations, and these were very high quality workers. They were identified as high performers. But they had lots of things they wanted to talk about at work that they couldn't talk about. The big conversation gap around their development was around their career development. So careers were one of the kind of unmet needs. And then just look at the last point there. The 40% of people who had something they wanted to talk about that they weren't talking about were 3 times more likely to be coming to leave. And that's what I meant when I said earlier, it may seem dangerous to talk about careers, but it's probably more dangerous not to talk about careers. And these were valuable people. These were people that their businesses wanted to keep. So you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. But particularly, you might be more damned if you don't. Told you I couldn't read from script. There's just going to be a few minutes while I was going over loads like this. If you look at what people talk about when they're having a good conversation at work, a good career conversation, this is some old research I was involved with, and with Jenny Kidd at Vertback and Charles Jackson at iCeGS. I think the thing that still interests me about the stuff that people covered in conversations they said were effective is how wide they were. Look at the list of things that people were talking about. These are not conversations with career guidance professionals. These are conversations with people that they have found to talk to about their careers. And so any sense that the kinds of conversations that people have at work, if they can find someone to do that sitting there with them, that those are somehow narrower or more constrained or less depth than you would expect in a career guidance setting, I think is wrong. It's interesting and it's wrong. But not everyone finds these conversations, and not many times in our working lives do we have good conversations. But when we do, and they're not with a career professional, they're no less rich, complex, far-reaching, deep, personal than the kind of best conversation we've hoped for with a career professional. And it's interesting, when you do research and then you leave it for a number of years, a few things stay with you. And I suppose from that research, that's what's stayed with me. And the fact that someone said, I choose the person, not the hat. So this is about finding that person who you can talk to. Not because they're your boss or because they're the HR manager or because they're your friend at work. Not because of that role title they might have, but because of who they are and because of the ability they may have to give you the right kind of space to have that conversation in. Does that resonate with you? Just out of interest, how many people in the room have had a really amazing conversation at work about their career? Ever? Oh, look, is there? Who is it with, out of interest? Not the name, but...
Well, my boss is a career advisor.
Oh, right. Well, I'm pleased there's one that does the job properly. How many of you have had really important conversations outside work about your career? More? And how many of them, keep your hands up, up. How many, put your hands down if they weren't with family and friends? Now, you see, that's interesting. That is what we found, that actually there were fewer family and friends in here than we thought. But they were they are semi-professional. When you're talking about grown-ups, it'd be different with children, I suspect. But the people even outside work tended to be in people work-related network, not just mates. There were fewer mates than we were expecting. I did a brief bit of work asking career coaches and career counsellors what they thought they talked about. It was very interesting in that they were losing their jobs so quickly, it was quite hard to interview them before they lost their jobs. And so it was quite difficult to conclude the research if I really wanted to. But that map covers a lot of the same territory. The bit that is more missing is the stuff about the labour market options and the choices that people have, which in that list is quite big. Options in the business and outside, so sometimes narrow, sometimes wide. The politics, the processes. This is more conventional, really. The top of the diagram is rather more about exploring yourself, and the bottom rather more about taking action. And there was a bit in the tendency, if people call themselves counsellors, to be a bit more towards the top, and coaches a bit more towards the bottom, but it wasn't at all a black and white divide. The bit on the left is a bit more about work. Actually, I've got a laser. See if I'll probably shine it in my F9 now. Oh, there, look. That stuff is a little bit more about jobs, and this stuff is a little bit more about skills and learning. And again, on the whole, people are rather more interested in that stuff. I think one of the difficulties for employers is if you see career development as a learning and development issue, you end up talking a lot to people about the training they need, but not so much about how they get themselves into the work they want to do. And I suspect that's true in education as well. That if we make it only a skills issue, it's not as relevant to people. So let's come back to career professionals then. We've looked at what people might want to talk about. This is a picture of, non-rhetorical question. It is a needle in a haystack. I'm a mathematician by background, so that means I'm allowed to play really fast in this with numbers. So I had a go. Okay, Jax, how many career professionals are there in the UK? I couldn't find any reasonably. Anybody? 100,000? 10,000? 100,000? Mathematicians can do this. We're only interested in how hugely big something is, whether it's 1,003. Less than your word, 40,000. That's not good enough question. 40,000, right. Do I hear more than 40,000? How many do we think have? A lot less. The CDI on its website says it aspires to have 10,000 members. I didn't know what that meant. iCeGS has got 2,300 people on its mailing list. I don't know what that means. I reckoned by the time you'd taken out half of that, if you were generous and said there were 10,000, you probably got at least half of those people working with young people, haven't you? You know, you've got a lot working in schools and colleges and universities. So I played very fast and loose. I compared it with figures that are actually better, because they are on the web and they're properly collected, of around 30 million people in employment. Okay, so do the maths. How many people do we have one career guidance person for? I'm not very good at doing those sorts of sums, but I did do it on my calculator. It's about if you're generous, it's about 1 to 3,000. I've never met one in my normal life, have you? You know, if I didn't work in this field, I would never have met one. I have never met one in the workplace, other than under very particular circumstances. I'll talk about it in a minute. They don't hang about workplaces, they hang about other places. We know from Charles Jackson's recent survey that a lot of people who are career professionals also do other work as well. So, you know, that's, if you think about the hours of the week they do it, it's for. So, you know, my best punt, but for goodness sake, don't tweet this figure or film it or anything, because it's not at all a sensible figure, is that it may be there's one career professional for every 6,000 working adults by the time you've taken out the lost work jobs. Ish. You know, it's certainly not 1 to 600,000, and it's nowhere near 1 to 60. That's what mathematicians do. We're only interested in order to make sheet. Okay. How many managers in the UK? How many people would you have to look at work to find a manager? How many? 10. So, okay, you've got 1 in 10 chance bumping into a manager. You've got a 1 in 300 chance bumping into your HR function. So, I needle in the haystack principle. There just are not many careers guidance people in the workplace. Full stop. I mean, there just aren't. This is not a criticism. There just aren't. I do something regularly. I Google career guidance Lewis. Lewis is my nearest town. Or career coaching Lewis. Or career counselling Lewis. How many people did I get on Sunday when I did my latest test? No. I got every kind of kooky therapist you could possibly imagine. Lewis is a town that has its own pound, so it's only, probably Top Mess is the only weirder place in the country. They're not tweet that one. So it's not that there are not counsellors and therapists. There are thousands. But if you try and find a careers one, they offered me a life coach in Brighton and a career counsellor in Tunbridge Wells. That's a quite long way away. So, they're not around. Okay, so what's that a picture of? Needles. That is a haystack of needles. And my contention today is that's what we're living in. We're not really living in a haystack where we're trying to find a needle. We're living in a haystack of needles. All those needles are people who can help us with our careers if we're smart enough. And if they're smart enough to know what they can do. And I just want to spend a bit of time rehearsing what that might look like. Doesn't mean they're all going to be wonderful career counsellors. But let's just look at some of the things that they bring, those needles in your haystack. And they're really different things. So some people might be able to help us because they know us very well. And certainly in the work I did on career conversations at work, there were certain conversations that were valuable because somebody was able to say, look, I've known you for 20 years. Are you sure that's really what you want to do? Or that's not what you've been saying to me for the last 6 months. These are not people who know about a whole lot of other things, but they know you and can help you think about whether you do mean that, or whether you mean something different, or whether you've changed, or whether you're changing, coming back to that deeper point about identity. Some people know what you're good at. Who knows what we're good at? Who's in the best position to see what we're good at? In word terms.
We are.
Sorry?
We are.
No, actually, people assess themselves very badly. You look at how they assess their skills. Some of us over-assess, some of us under-assess. So we like to think we're very good at it, but actually other people who watch us in relation to other people probably can see more clearly than we can see ourselves. As I think we like to think we're very good at knowing what we're good at, but I think sometimes it's easier for someone else to have a look as well. I think that's one of the ones good managers are often quite good at. They may be rubbish at a lot of the rest of this stuff. But they're in a very good position to see us. So are peers, if we're able to have a good conversation with them. So are customers sometimes. Teachers can be, if you're in a kind of that relationship with somebody. Sometimes young people, when people high up in businesses are asked why they like mentoring much younger people, they often say that the upbeat feedback they get from somebody of a different generation than much younger. So why do you do that? And why do we do it that way? What you're capable of is the really hard one. Understanding trends in business and opportunities, people working in sectors, people working in jobs are the people who understand what's happening there. Not even labour market economists, or people out in the world actually working at different things. People who are good at supporting others in making decisions. That's a different skill set again. People who can help you learn stuff, or find you other people who can help you learn stuff. And again, if you look at managers in business, they're not all great coaches. The best of them are quite good at helping you find somebody else who can help you, and their contacts may be better than yours. Politics is a huge thing in employers, politics with a small b. how you get around the system, how you understand who to talk to. Interestingly, HR people can be very helpful there. They often understand the politics very well if they're willing to cough up. They're also the people who know what jobs are coming up. They're often the ones who get early sight of actual opportunities. The trouble with managers is even if you escape them for the rest, it's quite hard to escape them here. They can be massive helps or hindrances. So even if you hate your manager, it's worth getting them on your side at some point. And last, I come to impartial. You've probably put it first. The more I think about these things, the less clear I am that any of these people ever are impartial. And I've never seen more partial career advice than in the public service. The sorts of advice that people get in schools and colleges is no criticism of people that do that job. It's just politics is always telling them what choices are okay and not okay. It was incredibly clear and very sad, actually, in this study, the pressure that the people advising the unemployed in our sample were put onto to just get them into a job, any job. And that was, that's not the fault of the people doing that job. That's the situation, that's the reality they're in. And people saying over and over again, but I didn't just want to be put into a job. I wanted to think about the kind of job I really wanted to do. Have you seen Clutterbuck's new career conversations? This fairly new David Clutterbuck mentoring. I think this is a really interesting list. It's another way of looking at the career conversation problem at work, and a nice, direct, sort of thought-provoking one. He says we need 4 conversations at work. The one we really have with ourselves, the inner, important one, where we choose very carefully who we talk to, because that's where we're really thinking. Then he has a second category, which I think is very nice, where you're talking to stakeholders. That is, they have a stake in you. And he tends to put the line manager in that category. That is not a neutral conversation, but they're a key stakeholder. I like the third one, which is about the relationship that organisation wants with its employees much more generally. This isn't an individual conversation. This is about, so what's on offer around here then? So what do we expect from you? And then the fourth one, of course, really important. How we're using our wider networks, both inside work and outside work. And I thought that was an interesting new way of framing some of this stuff. Less in terms of who we're talking to, but what are the different sorts of conversation we want to have. And I know I shall go on using that one that I found it. I think it's helpfully thought-provoking. Employers have had good goes at organising things in different ways. And I thought I'd just talk you through a few that they've tried, with varying success, to be fair, but just to show the range of ways that if you want to give a bit more career support at work, how you go about it. I should say that not many employers have used many of these days. But let's just have a little look at what some of them are. If we start over on the pink side, the left-hand side, my family are colourblind, so I never say anything's peach if I haven't possibly helped it. But there's what the bit over here. Oops, sorry, touched the wrong. This stuff. This is the sort of your manager, other managers around, and a lot of informal contacts at work. We mentioned those already a fair bit. Yeah. The reason I put the word community in that box to managers is that I think we make a mistake if we think that it's only that person's manager that can be a player here. Other managers are very important. And in fact, in the study of effective career conversations, we found that half of the big conversations were with managers, but only a fifth were with the boss. So a lot were with either the boss's boss or uncles and aunts, organisational uncles and aunts, other managers around. And so some organisations are really injecting the extra career development skills into that peak population in different ways. If we then look at, where should we go next? Let's look at the top row. The intranet, there are some very good materials that employers can use. The track record of people using them persistently is not very strong. Career workshops. Any of you know employers that run career workshops? It's a very cost-effective way in providing career support at work. It can be done within the normal learning and development activity. People like it. It gives them a social group to work with. And in terms of careers education, it's like careers education to grown-ups, really. It's both giving you the skills to manage your own career as well as looking at your career at a point in time. I think we should use them more. If we go along the top there, so if we look at the HR service centre, one of the funny things that's happened to HR is all the skill has been peeled out. We've got small numbers of specialists left who are down here. And then we've got people in call centres. It's some organisations are thinking about, well, who in HR can provide a bit of extra support? And although they always have an extra brain in different ways, a lot of HR people have quite a lot of the skills. Increasingly, they're training as coaches and counsellors. So if you think of the career skill set, they're often quite well placed. All sorts of interesting things to out the role. A few organisations have set up specialist internal career services here. I've been looking recently again at the one in the Ministry of Defence. It has very small numbers of employees. I think only about 4 full-time equivalents. But they have advised thousands of FOD employees, face-to-face or by telephone. They were selected from the workforce and then trained in career guidance. And that is their main job. And that's a very unusual one. Another interesting one is this one, which we would see in Oxfordshire County Council, for example, where employees who are interested in doing so are offered training as career coaches, in their case is the term they would use. And it is part of their job to offer advice to others who they do not have a work relationship with. So in their model, you can't do that if you're that person's manager. Would go to someone else. Skill and cunning in that one is that you can't sack them very easily because they're normal workers as well. One of the problems with a dedicated resource in a company is it terribly unlabels and cuts. And I've seen so many businesses put a specialist service in and then a bit of it again, and they come and go. I think the volunteer model is a very interesting one. I haven't mentioned external, and things like professional bodies can be very important to people. Other trade unions, there are many other organisations in their lives. So those are just some of the models, and I only put that up not to say that lots of employers are doing all this, because I don't think that's really true. But it's not that people haven't got models of how this could work and how different kinds of people can be corralled. And that it's not that difficult to get some capability within an organisation. Obviously much easier within a large organisation than in a very small one. But some are really kooky. The Foreign Office trains ambassadors in all sorts of bizarre things, including NLP techniques. And so their very best career characters are ambassadors. And I assume we get Ferrero Rocher chocolate. That would be a treat in Wendy. So just sort of come full circle then. Where have we been? I think that was a proper, thank you. Just to wrap up, I think we are at such an exciting time when employers, more than for at least 20 years, do think that career issues are quite important. It's taken them a hell of a long time to get back to saying that. We know quite a lot, really, about the kinds of things that people may want. We know that's quite diverse. We know there are all those needles in that haystack that could be offering different bits of the jigsaw. And we know that there are quite well tried models of how you set up something that's a little more systematic and a bit less hit and miss. So if I come back to my original question, that's just what I talked you through. It probably is a tiny profession. We don't give them that. I think it is, as I showed you. But it seems to me, particularly with the creation of the new institute, it's at a moment when it could be much more influential than it's been for quite a long time. That people for whom a set of career guidance skills is one of their main working identities are well poised, really, to not ever be huge, perhaps, but to be much more influential in that map of what happens to adults. Is it everyone's business? Well, I think absolutely. My own experience of talking to people who have had good help from many different sorts of others is that I would rather it were everyone's business than that there were so many people in the UK who never have someone who talks properly about their working lives and gives them that chance to explore. And so I'm much less worried about impartiality than I am about the complete absence of career support for adults. So I guess my answer is that you have to offer what you can. And that means that different people with different roles can only offer different parts of this. They can't offer the whole shooting match. But I don't think career professionals can offer the whole shooting match either. I think you have to use wisely as an adult what you access. And that's code for something much ruder that I would like to say, which is that actually it is all partial. Career guidance is all partial. And therefore, we have to let grown-ups learn how to use it wisely, not say, oh, it's very dangerous to talk to someone who isn't a career professional. That's like stopping your children doing exciting things. Employers have a big job to do. They need to be much more upfront about career issues. And they need to offer another route than just the boss. So I almost don't mind who that other person is, as long as if you hate your boss, you don't have to talk to them. They need to encourage the informal. They need to skill up both managers and employees in the skill sets we need to both give support and receive support. And some are doing so. Several people have employed me this year to run workshops for managers to give them some of the skills to have better conversations with their staff. And career professionals, I think, have to be visible. I can't bear it, but when I Google for you, I can't even find you. I think they have to dump labour market myths and know much more about what's really happening. They need to appreciate what others in that haystack can offer. To demystify a bit, I want something really much more upfront about if I were having career guidance, would I even know it? I think the issue of tools is one you might like to discuss. Employers use awfully bad tools because they don't have better tools to use for career stuff. And skill other people, skill all those other needles. So for me, it is a tiny profession. It is everyone's business. And I think it has to be an open door, not a closed shop. And at that point, I'm going to stop. And we thought you might like to spend a couple of minutes with a near neighbour, in twos or threes, and maybe just have a think about what you think career professionals might like to turn their energies to, or what employers might need to turn their energies to, and then we'll let it up.
Make it 2 minutes.
My boss, English, I pass. Time. Those are virtually say after career habit. That's pretty. Yes. Read, yeah. It's. We use question. Oh. 你的衣服爽。But I'm so fast. Okay, thanks very much. That's terrific. I mean, that's a good, policy mark, isn't it? That you usually end this conversation you've got. But could we go on to about 4:05? We've used a little bit of time, I think. Can I just say, I mean, just two things, just very quickly. First of all, what struck me was how all those issues you could frame for an educational institution, they're all the same issues, the range of different things, and the issue of where a career professional might sit in relation to those, if at all, do we need them? If they are there, what is it they can help to do? Can they help to build the quality of all that stuff through others? And when they do something themselves, do they offer something distinctively different? I mean, is there a career conversation you can have, you might hope to have with a career professional, which might be distinctively different with the wonderful, excellent conversation you might have with other people? I think we're at the spot.
I want to see if there's a question.
Yes, especially. Yeah.
Well, my answers are here. I think till they demystify it, I don't know what those conversations look like. It looked to me like the film was Camelot. You know, it's like there's some golden conversation in a castle on the horizon, and no one will tell me what it looks like. I partly did that study talking to career counsellors and coaches to find out, and I found it very interesting, but I didn't have an aha compared with, say, a little interview study I did on workplace coaches who were much better at articulating what they did that was different. So demystify, I think tools and skills is where I put my money. You know, if you've got a tiny profession, why don't we offer employers, really simple, really sensible tools that any fool could use, That's what smart, that's, if you look at heart resuscitation and 100 other areas of life, that's what professionals do. They nail it for other people by demystifying it and giving us a bit of kit we can use. And employers are using MBTI. I mean, I've got nothing against MBTI, but it's not a careers tool, is it? And they're using career anchors, which are jolly helpful, but they're only a little corner. And then beyond that, they're lost. That's the only two things they can make. And then I think skilling others, yes, massively, massively, massively. And actually, some of the people I know who I admire the most do spend their lives skilling others to offer career support. That seems to me how you get real leverage.
Right. Two very quick ones here. Can I ask, can you stand up and say who you are and where you're from? Do you mind?
Hi, Margaret Christopoulos used to work here, don't anymore. Is he doing lots of other things? And basically, I wanted to talk about on the employer side, we'd use this blanket to unemployed, but they're all very individual, and a hell of a lot of them, 97%, are very small. And having worked for 10 years with these small micro business and small businesses, they haven't got time to have a conversation with any. And everybody's doing everything now, convents going around in many circles, barely. And if they've even heard of any of those tools, then whatever. So basically, the people in that area as a broad blanket haven't got time for it. And I think we often tend to think, oh, both voices are good, and oh, she's time to get. But there is a massive lot of other people in that bracket.
Yes, yes and no. I started my working life with very small firms, and I've been interested in them ever since. And I think the one thing I don't agree with, Margaret, is that this is not like time you're not doing something else, really. I think one of the things that smaller organisations sometimes do better than big ones is that boundary between, the activity and the relationship can be better blurred. And so actually one of the firms where I've seen the very best career development was a tiny innovation company where the managing director set up the whole thing to be both very personal and very developmental. And his hard-nosed business strategy was to get people chief at the start of their careers, keep them 5 years, and in that time to get a massive amount out of them. And he did that by really accelerating their own development. So I think it isn't always that they can't do it. I don't think they do it the same way. The other thing I think we haven't explored today, and I'm not sure the country's explored very much, is more collaborative ways. If you look at HE, some of the most exciting innovations are where groups of small firms satelliting around the institutions can collaborate. And that seems to me, particularly where you get a lot of small firms in the same sort of business in an area. Where I live, there are a lot of media-y, IT-ish, and we have a thing called Wired Sussex that joins them all up. It already does job advertising. It wouldn't be an enormous stretch for it to gang up and do a bit of self-help on career fronts, or even employ them. The other thing is professional bodies. For people at higher skill levels, I think many professional bodies do wonderful work with the education system. They don't always offer that much to their own members by way of career support as opposed to trading CPD. And I think that's another undeveloped, because of course a lot of our small firms are high technology small firms now, or they're quite sophisticated. So just because they're small doesn't mean they're stupid. And I think we sometimes make that mistake too. We think small firms are somehow less sophisticated. They're not always, but they don't have the same resource and the same strategy. There's so much time. Well, I don't think big firms have much time. I don't think anyone has much time. But they have to find neat. Yes, you're quite right. You have to find neat ways.
Okay, let's take. So we see if we can take one or two, maybe two or three, and just get some more voices, please. Isha.
Okay. My name's Isabel Jones. I used to work here. I'm an iCeGS associate. My question relates to a population I haven't really referred to today, which is the retired. I mentioned that really early on. Could you cherry pick a little bit what you said so far in a way which might help one to offer career advice, guidance to the retired? Because, you know, as you say, it's for everyone.
Any others? We did about two or three, please. Yeah.
My name's Andrew McGregor. I'm from Merseyside. I'm a National Career Service Advisor. My concern is what you're describing as normal working people are potentially being squeezed out of guidance through things like the way the National Service contract is being framed. How can we, as a profession, influence decision makers, particularly political decision makers, to ensure that normal working people get a service and not just long-term unemployed and high need groups?
That's an easy question. One more. Oh, I just take.
Remember that those two. Yes, retired, but also that sort of complicated transition that lots of people have where you're not either working or not me. I think there is a danger, that one of the dangers for retired people is they lose some of the networks they've had. And so I think thinking about how people stay connected is really key. Although in a lovely way, they have more choice. So some of the terrific imperatives on people to think about this all very financially, and people who have very complicated caring setups. Obviously, a lot of retired people are carers too. I think it's that you may have different players, and I think particularly for people for whom work has been a very big and very structured part of their life, when they leave that employment, they've left a lot of the support network. So I think when people go to retirement training, there's all sorts of stuff. And there's enough stuff about building up your other networks. And communities could do more. There is all the stuff going on in communities, volunteering and other things that, again, they're not nearly as clearly signposted as one feels they should be.
The voluntary sector springs to mind as very much as part of the local community.
Yes. But it's something I test in my local area. I don't know about yours. I know there's a lot of it going on. Yeah. How you tap into it efficiently as an individual, says, what might I contribute here? It's not always that straightforward.
And you sort of feel once you got into it, you wouldn't be able to extract yourself. I noticed this in friends who don't, they're tricky choices for people about how much to connect.
And I just ask, a lot of the frameworks you discussed, the tools that Central Skills about, a lot of those things could be applied.
Absolutely, it's popular, yeah. Because the skill set's no different. I think it's that the setting in which you're doing, underfed, maybe a bit different. The squeezed out grown up, I think, is just like the squeezed out child. I think at schools, if your child is no trouble, it definitely gets any attention. And I think the same is true for grown up. And I'm not sure, it's one of the things I really change my mind about often. I don't know that it is the role of the state to financially support career support for individuals who could pay for it, who are not in it serious duress. I'd be interested. I found it fascinating when we had Low Direct going full pelt, what a service that was able to provide at very low cost. I think one of the answers to the squeezed out grown up is that engagement argument with employers is the one to look for. And it seems to me more likely that when it comes to push to shove, you're going to get a little bit more money out of some employers than out of the state to give a modest amount of career support to employed adults who are not in extreme circumstances. I'd love to think that every grown-up had access to serious career support. Politically, I'm just not sure it's going to happen. Did somebody maybe...
It did happen for a while with that direct.
Well, it did happen for Low Direct, and the evidence on that was very hard to me. So it may be that you do it for people you can't avoid doing it for, and then you let the working adults squeeze in when no one's looking. That's sort of what Low Direct managed. So political argument is very difficult because politics is always interested in shifting people off unemployment registers and not having riots. That's what drives politics.
Other questions or comments?
Actually, I got a call. Well, sorry. So, I've hesitated, but I'm going to say something. Okay, I've been fortunate to have 2 successful careers.
So you all lately.
Oh, sorry. Used to have the connections in Leicestershire year longer. Okay, so I've had an very successful HR management career. And recognise a lot of things that you say, and I support a lot of things that you put here. And the key thing is succession planning in the workplace. And I also work in organisations where I've had mentors who've not been the line managers. So succession planning and mentors work very well if, as the lady used to work over at area saying, if the organisation's got the funding, the time and the resource, etc. However, my concern on the other side is a careers practitioner. I've been known as an IAG advisor, a careers advisor, but never a careers counsellor. So I think if I've been sitting in front of my computer on Sunday night and tapped in careers counsellor, I don't think you would have found somebody local. I did type in a lot of different words, and I'm sure they're there, but they don't, we live in Google world, don't we? If they don't, but I think I joined the careers advisor, career service, which we've been annihilated over the last few years, offered a very impartial service and a service quite different to what the workplace would offer. So we have both two, so quite distinct differences.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Cool. One minute, yeah.
This is a comment about something happened recently. I registered for a conference, a meeting, which was going to happen tomorrow. This is an NIACE meeting, and it was about the application of career frameworks to adult career guidance. I was the only person that registered, and it was cancelled. I have had my money refunded and wonderful workshop material sent to me. I would so much rather have had that day one person, myself, retired lecturer from here, just interested in development of career guidance for retired, was I mentioned. Only one person. Why? You know, I mean, I'd love to. Any comments on that? This is NIACE, Ignites.
Well, far from what we all know, there it's the funds, isn't it? It's a career advisor myself. You know, it's a really scary prospect going out there, setting us upon your own, because I'm in the career service for a senator like. Yes, I people adults. Is anybody going to pay me for that service? And I think, see, you stated in this protected area of working for HE College, you know, Stall University. Whereas I would actually rather be an independent, work for myself, be totally impartial, provide a service for, you know, big sectors of people that need it. You know, I went into the voluntary sector near to me, and they were saying there's a massive need for all of the charities that are doing work with people, with adults and retired groups and things, and they would love somebody to come in and give careers advice. But it's meant to be who's going to pay to do it, and it's
Just a Google one. Love, this is the last one.
Yeah, I mean, especially there's a number. I mean, you're talking about a number of different models, and they're quite different. The things you're talking about, well, managers do some of this, seems to be quite. I mean, that's quite a thorny, difficult role. And I manage Jones Siobhan. I think about their careers every day, and they don't necessarily appreciate that. We have heard, you have a complex set of relationships. Yes, so we have a human relationship, and you know it's equally important for me to advise them as it will be to advise my sister. But also, I manage a relationship where I get something out of them. I also have this kind of a conflict of interests where you're thinking, well, I don't want to go, so I don't want to say that you'll be really good at it. But all these pieces, that seems to be very different than the other example where you talk about a voluntary sort of role, which the only place I've seen that one or two companies, they're fairly small, but then Union Learn is a place where it exists. Yeah. But now that seems to be much more as something that you could say actually could take solve the place of where there's a vacuum where career guidance publicly funded career guidance can't fill is train our professionals who voluntary. Now, could that not be a role for the state? If the state's going to invest in this, could the role not be for the state to invest in capacity build of voluntary work-based or community-based career? I mean, that seems to me like it would be a more sort of strategic way to use state funding in this kind of area.
I think that's a very interesting suggestion. Then it becomes like blood donation, and something will do for each other. And I've long thought that career guidance is like purple.
So do we.
It's a very interesting suggestion, Christopher.
On that page, I think you see his blood in it. Wendy, that was terrific. My sense is that actually you said the title was Time Fashion or Everyone's Business. I think what you're saying is Time Fashion and Everyone's Business. But also the issue for the profession is whether if it really engages with the interface between those two, it might become even more tiny because that's a threat, or whether actually it might become bigger because then you're in serious business, you're much more visible, and your value is seen much more. It seems to me that a lot of the questions you've been posing are about that, which is a really, really important question for us. So thank you very much.
Yes, but finish by thanking Wendy with a small gift, which will have an enormously